In this video, we will discuss the final chapter in your syllabus, which is growth. First, what is growth? So growth must be a permanent and irreversible increase in either biomass or length or width of the organism over a specific time. So maksudnya, kalau kita nak consider organism tu sudah undergo growth, dia punya change tu mestilah permanent, mesti selama-lamanya. For example, berat dia bertambah tapi dia takkan berkurang. So baru kita consider increase in weight ataupun biomass itu sebagai dia punya growth. Ataupun pokok tu semakin tinggi, iaitu increase in their length. So maksudnya increase in length itu considered as a growth. So next, awak kena boleh describe the growth phases. So there are three growth phases: cell division, cell enlargement, and cell differentiation. During cell division phase, basically the cell will increase in number by undergoing mitosis. Next, in cell enlargement, cell yang sudah undergoing mitosis tadi will start to increase in size. So size of the cell mainly increase in terms of length rather than width. So dia akan bertambah dari segi dia punya kepanjangan instead of dia punya lebar. And then the volume of the cytoplasm will also increase, including its content. So maksudnya size of the cytoplasm tu semakin lama semakin besar, termasuklah apa-apa yang kita jumpa dalam cytoplasm tersebut. So that will happen during cell enlargement phase of the growth phase. So the last one is cell differentiation phase. So in this phase, cells that have undergone enlargement tadi will start to change their structure ataupun akan ada perubahan dekat bentuk sel tersebut. And then with the change in structure, the cell now have the ability to perform a specific function. So sudah ada specialization in the function of cell lepas dia buat cell differentiation. So tiga phases ni berkaitan. Next, awak kena boleh identify these three different growth phases dekat plant root. Kalau plant, dia punya growth mainly occur dekat root tip dan juga shoot tip. Sebab dekat root tip dengan shoot tip lah yang kita akan jumpa apical meristem yang boleh buat mitosis. So tempat lain we can assume tak boleh buat mitosis sebab tak ada apical meristem. So that's why in plant, growth primarily occur dekat root dan juga shoot. So kat sini saya lukis structure of a typical plant root. So dekat plant root, kita boleh bahagi kepada tiga major zone of growth. So ada zone of cell division yang paling dekat dengan root tip. Lepas tu followed by zone of cell enlargement and then zone of cell differentiation. So jangan confuse zone dengan growth phases. So nama dia lebih kurang sama. Sebab kita define the zone dekat root tu based on apakah growth phases yang sel dekat situ sedang undergoing. For example, dekat zone of cell division, dekat situ kita jumpa sel yang sedang dalam growth phase cell division. Sama juga dekat zone of cell enlargement, dekat situ ada sel yang sedang undergoing phase cell enlargement. So jangan tukar-tukar dua terminologi ni. So kalau diminta growth phases, so jawab cell division, cell enlargement, cell differentiation. Kalau dia nak zone dekat root, so kena letak zone dekat depan tu. So zone of cell division, zone of cell enlargement, zone of cell differentiation. Ingat dia akan start daripada root tip. So dekat root tip tu yang ada zone of cell division. Sebab apa? Sebab dekat root tip tu yang ada apical meristem. So apical meristem yang boleh buat mitosis. Next, satu lagi cara untuk identify zone mana dekat plant root is by looking at the cell. So semua sel dekat zone of cell division are dense and have small size. Sebab sel tu baru je dividing by mitosis, so sel dia masih lagi kecil. And then ada banyak sebab dia rapidly undergoing mitosis. Kalau sel dekat zone of enlargement, kita akan nampak sel tu ada length yang panjang compared to their width. So dia panjang daripada dia lebar. Sel tu basically kurus tetapi panjang. So maksudnya sel itu berada dekat zone of enlargement. And then finally, dekat zone of cell differentiation, so ni paling senang, kamu cari dulu structure kita panggil sebagai root hair. So ingat tadi, bila cell tu undergoing in differentiation, dia akan start to have specific function. So in this case, cell tu sudah form a structure known as root hair. So kalau sudah ada specific structure, it can perform specific function. So for root hair, it can function to increase surface area for absorption of water and dissolved mineral. So nampak tak? Sel ini sudah ada specific function and specific structure, sebab tu dia kita jumpa dekat zone of cell differentiation. So itu cara awak identify. Kalau dia bagi gambar tapi tak label, awak boleh tahu sel itu berada di zone yang mana. Next is growth parameter. So growth parameter is basically the thing that we use to measure growth. So there are three main growth parameters. So the first one is wet mass, the second one is dry mass, the third one is length. Untuk measure growth, we can either measure dia punya wet mass ataupun dia punya dry mass ataupun dia punya length. So apa beza wet mass dengan dry mass? So wet mass is basically the mass of the plant with water content. So maksudnya kita just ambil plant tersebut dan timbang, termasuklah water content yang ada dalam plant tersebut. So itu adalah wet mass. Tapi kalau dry mass, kita ambil weight of the plant without their water content, minus. So minus water content. So maksudnya untuk kita ambil dia punya berat, kita kena keringkan dahulu tumbuhan tersebut. So if we dry the plant ataupun the organism, means that the plant ataupun the organism will die. So dry mass, the main drawbacks of using dry mass as a growth parameter adalah kita kena bunuh organism tersebut untuk kita dapatkan dia punya dry mass. So itu main drawbacks for dry mass. Tapi kalau wet mass tadi, kita tak perlu bunuh, kita just ambil dan timbang. Tetapi kalau wet mass, dia punya main drawbacks dia, kelemahan dia adalah, so kalau wet mass, water content dalam organism sentiasa berubah. So maksudnya growth parameter untuk wet mass adalah less accurate compared to the dry mass. Kalau dry mass, oleh kerana kita dah buang dia punya water content, measurement of growth itu very accurate. So both of these growth parameter, wet mass dan juga dry mass, ada dia punya advantage, ada dia punya disadvantage. So nak guna mana satu will depends on the organism yang kita nak measure dia punya growth. So that is growth parameter. Next subtopic is growth curve. So for growth curve, ada satu jenis growth curve yang awak kena belajar, which is the sigmoid growth curve. So ada banyak jenis growth curve, tapi awak belajar satu saja, which is the sigmoid growth curve. So kat sini kita ada sigmoid growth curve. So the growth curve was produced when we plot a growth parameter. So tak kisahlah awak ambil wet mass ke, dry mass ke, length ke. So kita akan plot it against time. So time can be days, hours, second, tak kisahlah. So after we plot the graph, kita akan dapat a curve known as sigmoid growth curve. Another thing to take note about the sigmoid growth curve is that the growth parameter that we measure is of the entire population, bukannya melibatkan individual sahaja. For example, kita ambil wet mass of the whole population, so kita averagekan, so itu adalah growth parameter untuk sigmoid growth curve. So kita bukannya measure wet mass seekor individu, tetapi kita ambil the whole population of individu to produce a sigmoid growth curve for that particular population. So the main characteristic yang kita nampak for the curve to be considered as a sigmoid, mestilah dia punya shape, which is S shape. So do not confuse between the name of the curve, which is sigmoid, with the shape of the curve, S-shape curve. So minta shape, S-shape. Minta nama, sigmoid. So kenapa the sigmoid have an S-shape curve? So sekarang kita tengok apakah phases yang kita jumpa dekat sigmoid growth curve. So mainly there are 4 phases. So the first one is lag phase, second one is exponential phase, and then decelerating phase, finally stationary phase ataupun plateau phase. So there are 4 phases in sigmoid growth curve. So for each of these phases, awak kena boleh explain what happened which causes the pattern seen. In lag phase, so the main characteristic untuk lag phase is slow growth. So kita nampak dekat dia punya graph yang color merah tu, dia punya growth occur very slowly. So awak kena explain apakah possible reason kenapa during lag phase ada slow growth. So there are 3 main possible reason for this. So the first one is organism tu baru starts to adapt to the new environment. So kalau dia baru nak adapt, so organism tu baru nak try to familiarize with the new environment. For example, dia baru nak cari tempat untuk hidup, cari tempat yang dia boleh dapatkan makanan, and then cari tempat untuk to become its shelter, perlindungan. So itu adalah untuk adapting to the new environment. Next, another possible reason is the number of individual is still low. Maksudnya organism tersebut jumlah dia masih sikit. So bila jumlah dia sikit, the number of individual that able to reproduce pun masih sikit. So kalau the number of individual yang able to reproduce masih sikit, so that's why rate of reproduction will be low. So this happens during the lag phase of sigmoid growth curve. Next is exponential phase. So based on the name, kita tahu during this phase, the organism will undergoing exponential growth ataupun rapid growth. So kenapa exponential growth? Sebab the number of individual yang bertambah akan doubles every time. For example, daripada 2 jadi 4, 4 jadi 8, 8 jadi 16. Itu adalah double. So that's why kita panggil dia sebagai exponential growth. So based on the graph pun kita nampak, dia punya the number of individual tu akan bertambah dengan cepat. So kenapa? Sebab at this point, organism sudah adapt. Daripada lag phase tadi, masuk ke exponential phase, dia sudah adapt. Tadi baru nak adapt, sekarang dia sudah adapt. So when they already adapt to the environment, so karakter yang penting adalah reproduce at maximum rate. So kenapa boleh reproduce at maximum rate? Sebab at this time still lots of food, lots of shelter, and there is no waste accumulation. Next is decelerating phase. So decelerating phase, basically growth starts to slow down. Tadi semasa exponential, dia punya growth tu very rapid, sangat cepat. Tetapi bila masuk decelerating, growth itu still ada, cuma dia tidak secepat dalam exponential. So maksudnya dia starts to slow down, makin lambat. Kenapa? So the reason for this is, in the environment, the food source starts to become limited. And then the shelter also become limited. And then lastly, ada accumulation of toxic waste. Apa-apa faktor yang tidak limited semasa exponential tadi sudah start to become limited semasa decelerating phase. Sebab itulah dia punya growth akan start to slow down. Growth masih ada, cuma dia tidak banyak macam semasa exponential phase tadi. So bila all these factors starts to become limiting, akan ada competition between the individual in the population. So bila ada competition, akan menyebabkan death rate, kadar kematian pun starts to increase. So another reason kenapa the size of population tidak double macam exponential phase tadi, walaupun growth itu masih berlaku. The last phase is stationary phase ataupun plateau phase. So in this phase kita nampak dia punya growth curve tu akan mendata. So plateau tu maksudnya mendata, stationary tidak berubah. So kenapa? It's because the net growth is zero. Net growth, bukannya growth is zero. So jangan confuse net growth with growth. So net maksudnya birth rate equals to death rate. So birth rate nama lain dia adalah natality. Kalau death, so itu adalah mortality. So birth rate is equals to death rate. For example, kalau ada 5 individual yang baru lahir, at the same time akan ada 5 organism lain yang akan sudah mati. So 5 tambah 5 tolak, so dia punya net growth adalah kosong, 0. So that's why dia punya graph itu akan remain static ataupun plateau. So jangan cakap growth is 0, kena cakap net growth is 0. So kenapa dia punya net growth is 0? Sebab population sudah reach maturity. So maksudnya size itu tak akan bertambah, tak akan berkurang, tapi dia akan remain static sahaja, stationary sahaja. So why? Because the population already reached maximum population size ataupun equilibrium. So itu adalah stationary phase ataupun plateau phase of sigmoid growth curve. So that's it for sigmoid growth curve.